Hi guys. All right, so if any of you saw the first video to my students, I explained that we were reading by the Great Horn Spoon, and we were on chapter 10. So I'm going to continue reading our story by the Great Horn Spoon by Sid Fleischman. So in chapter 9, it was about the guy in the Jippy Joppa hat. Remember that? I talked about my mom wearing what looked like a Jippy Joppa hat when she was at the center, and we all laughed about that. So they got off the ship. They're in San Francisco, and they had to decide if they were going to Bedbug, Whiskey Flat, or Hangtown. Jack, of course, voted for Hangtown. So here we go. Chapter 10, The Rogue Outrogued. Praiseworthy remained remarkably calm. He didn't so much as raise an eyebrow, but he did give Jack a faint poke in the ribs with his elbow, as if to say, "Easy, Master Jack, easy. Leave the scoundrel to me." "Small world, ain't it?" grinned Cut-Eye Higgins. His hand remained at rest in silent warning on the butt of his pistol. "I hadn't noticed until today," said Praiseworthy. If I didn't know better, I'd think you were still in Rio." The villain's scarred eye was set at a squint. "Rio was too hot for me, you might say, so I lit out for Panama. Crossed the isthmus by bongo boat and muleback. A whole parade of folks is getting to the Pacific that way, and looks like I beat you to California at that. I dare say you had a good map to guide you." The man in the Jippy Joppa hat bared his yellow teeth in a laugh. "A map? A map? Why, what map is that?" Praiseworthy narrowed his glance. "I bring you regards from the good Dr. Buckbee." "Well, ain't that neighborly of you?" The stage charged across the valley flats, and the Frenchmen shook handkerchiefs in front of their noses to keep the dust away. Jonas T. Fletcher kept shooting tobacco juice out the window as if the ground were on fire. Jack's hand fell to the horn spoon in his belt. He could almost imagine it was a 4-shooter. That would make Mr. Cut-Eye Higgins sit up and take notice. Why, he'd beg to hand over Dr. Buckbee's gold map. The dueling pistol in his belt would be no match for a 4-shooter. But Praiseworthy didn't seem in the least concerned about the lack of firearms. "Have you met Mr. Fletcher?" he said, tugging at his left glove. "He tells us he's an undertaker. A man in your line of work, sir, never knows when he'll need the services of a good undertaker." "I didn't get the name," said the Missourian. "Higgins." Cut-Eye grinned. "Doc Higgins, dentist." "Well, now," smiled the undertaker, "the boys will be glad to have a tooth extractor in camp." Praiseworthy winked at Jack. The impostor had apparently given up his judgeship. A dentist? Was he? Specializing in extracting gold teeth, no doubt. "And now, if you gentlemen will excuse me," said the butler, "I believe I'll catch a nap." Sleep? Jack thought. How could anyone sleep with Mr. Cut-Eye Higgins sitting there? But before the stage had traveled another quarter of a mile, Praiseworthy was napping soundly. Jack sat gazing at the villain, their knees almost touching, and the man in the Jippy Joppa hat gazed back at him. By late afternoon, they had reached the brown foothills, and the stage pulled up at a relay station for a change of horses. With the mountains rising at their shoulders, Praiseworthy and Jack stood at the refreshing themselves with dippers of cool water. The 4-horse team was being replaced with a team of 6 for the hard climb ahead. "Do you think he's got Dr. Buckbee's map with him?" Jack whispered. "No doubt about it," said Praiseworthy. "I'll wager he doesn't take his hand off that dueling pistol even when he sleeps." "We'll need a shotgun to get the map away from him, a 4-shooter at least." "Lacking one and the other," said the butler, "we'll have to rely on our wits, Master Jack. I have no intention of allowing Dr. Buckbee to be cheated out of his map." Soon they were underway again. The narrow road climbed sharply. Oak trees gave way to shadow-darkened pines. The sun was setting across the valley as if to desert them, and the driver's whip cracked in the air like rifle shots. Instead, the wooden coach, the passengers sat knee to knee, as before, and held on against the bumps and ruts of the road. Finally, the stage rounded a bend, and the trail seemed to shoot up like a ladder. "Everybody out!" shouted the driver. "Push, agents, push!" Cut-Eye Higgins didn't take his hand off the pistol but for a moment. He pushed with one hand. Slowly, the stagecoach piled high on top of the luggage and supplies climbed the road. The driver urged the team on with his whip. "Keep at it, gents, we're gaining." Jack put his shoulder to the coach like the others and dug his shoes in the dirt. Halfway up the hill, it seemed to him the driver must have 6 whips in his hands, like all the noise he was making. Suddenly, a window shattered, and then another, and just as suddenly Jack became aware that it wasn't only the crack of the whip in the air. "Gunshots! Road agents!" the driver yelled. He set the brake and reached for the rifle. "Hold up!" Praiseworthy pushed Jack under the coach. Jonas T. Fletcher had beat him there. Through the spokes of the big wheels, Jack saw a dozen horsemen in red bandanas around their faces charge out of the pines. Cut-Eye Higgins drew his dueling pistol and fired. He missed. He didn't have a chance to reload. The road agents had them surrounded, their guns and rifles bristling in the twilight. The leader, a big fellow with holes in his boots, called to the driver, "Throw down your rifle. The rest of you, reach for the sky, or I'll send you there pronto." Jack swallowed hard and came out in the open. Praiseworthy gave him a reassuring glance and didn't seem scared at all. They raised their hands. Cut-Eye Higgins growled to himself, but put his arms shot up like the others. "Sorry to interrupt your journey," said the leader. "We'll only detain you a moment. Boys, hop to it." 2 of the outlaws climbed to the top of the stage and threw down the trunks and boxes and carpetbags. Others broke them open to paw through the contents for valuables. Meanwhile, another pair of road agents made quick work of the passengers. They pulled watches and chains off vests and tugged buckskin pouches of gold dust from pockets and belts. Jack tried not to look up at Praiseworthy's white gloves. The outlaws would never think of looking there, would they? So remember, Praiseworthy had the gold dust at the end of his gloves, at the end of the fingertips. "All right, agents," said one of the gang, threw the bandana across his mouth. "Now lower your hands one by one and let's have your rings." He started with the Frenchman and then came to Cut-Eye Higgins. He wore a gold ring set with ruby, like a drop of blood. Stolen, no doubt, thought Jack. The rogue is being outrogued, but it was small comfort. "Why, I wore this ring since I was a lad," said Cut-Eye Higgins. "It won't come off." "In that case," the outlaw laughed, "we'll just have to chop off the finger." Cut-Eye Higgins removed the ring in an instant, and the highwaymen roared. "I don't have a ring," said Jack. "I can see that, boy." The road agent moved on to Praiseworthy. "Well, look here. We got a regular gentleman with gloves on." "Not a gentleman," corrected Praiseworthy. "Merely a butler." "What's that? Never did hear of a butler." Jack's heart began to beat faster. Praiseworthy pulled off his right-hand glove. Their gold dust, their grub stake, would soon be exposed, but Praiseworthy seemed unconcerned as could be. "How about the other hand?" growled the outlaw. "Naturally," said Praiseworthy. He pulled the glove off each finger, carefully but casually, and held up his bare hand. The gold dust remained in the fingers of the glove. "No rings, as you see." And the outlaw moved on. Praiseworthy gave Jack a wink without winking and very calmly pulled the gloves on again. But another big fellow was emptying Praiseworthy's carpetbag in the dirt. Shirts, cuffs, links, hairbrush. "Why, look here," the ruffian chuckled. "A picture. A regular beauty, ain't she?" Jack recognized the tiny type at once. It was his Aunt Arabella. He didn't know Praiseworthy had her picture along. When he glanced up, Praiseworthy had gone white with anger. "I'll thank you to return that picture to my bag," he warned, stamping each word out of cold steel. "You don't say. Well, I'll be proud to own a picture like this. I guess I'll just take it along." The rest happened so fast that Jack missed half of it in the blink of an eye. Praiseworthy, in his fury, struck like a bolt of lightning. Grabbing the ruffian to his feet by the shirt front, he slammed his left glove fist into the man's bandana-covered face. The outlaw hurled back as if he'd been struck with a stick of cordwood, and he just lay there. "Why, look at that," said the undertaker in awe. "Knocked that big fella 15 feet uphill." If his fellow outlaws had held their fire, it was only because they were too startled by the butler's awesome left jab. They were like trees growing from the ground. They stood on, and then their leader seemed to grin behind his bandana. "I'd take my hat off to you," he said, "but it ain't fittin' for a man in my line of work. That was something to see, boys. Lift our fallen friends across the saddle, and we'll be going." Jack gazed at Praiseworthy with fresh admiration. The butler had never let on that he was so handy with his fists. The truth of the matter was that Praiseworthy had been so surprised as the others to see the brute go flying, and then he remembered the heavy gold dust packed in the fingertips of the glove. It was exactly as heavy as lead. With his fingers clenched around it, his fist hand had the kick of a mule. He picked up Aunt Arabella's picture and dusted it off. It seemed curious to Jack that he had brought it along, and made him feel strangely closer to Praiseworthy than ever before. "One more thing," said the gang leader. "All you gents take off your coats and drop them in a pile." The guns came up again, and that left no room for argument. Jonas T. Fletcher peeled off his frock coat. Cut-Eye Higgins dropped his dusty linen coat. Regretfully, Praiseworthy added his fine black coat to the pile. He would miss it. "Never met an immigrant yet," said the leader, "who didn't have a good gold piece sewed up in the lining of his coat. You won't need coats in this heat, gents, so we'll just take 'em along." An instant later, the highwaymen spurred their horses and carried away their booty of watches, rings, buckskin, gold pouches, and coats. Praiseworthy, unaccustomed to mere shirt sleeves, stood in the dust like a leopard suddenly deprived of his spots. "Wait till the boys hear about this," said the undertaker. 15 feet uphill. Praiseworthy moved past him to step in front of Cut-Eye Higgins. "I'll thank you, sir, to hand over Doc Buckbee's map." The dispirited villain reached for his dueling pistol, and Jack stopped in his tracks. Was Praiseworthy trying to get himself killed? "Don't bother to draw your gun," said the butler. "I was careful to notice that you never reloaded it. The map, sir, the map." The other man stared at him out of his scarred eye, and then began to chuckle. But to Jack, it sounded as much like a growl as a chuckle. "You're a little late," said Cut-Eye Higgins. "Late?" The map was sewn up in the lining of my coat. So we'll read one more. These chapters are so long, so we might have to go to just one chapter a day, but I'll go ahead and do chapter 11 since I said I would. So the next chapter, chapter 11, Jamocha Jack. The stagecoach climbed as if it were part mountain goat. It lurched, it halted, it bucked, it leaped, and it clung. At times, there was a sheer drop to one side of the trail. Far below, the pine trees looked to Jack like sharp green lances, waiting to skewer them if they slipped. He only looked once in a while. They were almost at the diggings, he told himself. He'd been telling himself that for days. But at last, the stagecoach arrived, bringing a cloud of summer dust all the way from Sacramento City. "Hangtown, gents," the driver snapped, with a final crack of his whip. "Looks mighty quiet today. Don't see nobody standing under a pine limb with his boots off the ground." A dog greeted them at the end of the street and barked them all the way to the Empire Hotel. The passengers got out. There was road dust in Jack's eyebrows, in his ears, and down his neck. Now that they had arrived, he had gold fever so bad that he didn't see how he could wait another 5 minutes to get his shovel in the ground. Hangtown! Everywhere he looked, there were men in jackboots and colored shirts. There wasn't a woman to be seen. The miners were coming and going, or standing and talking, or sitting and whittling. Blue freight wagons were being unloaded. Blindfolded mules were being loaded. The store shacks on each side of the street were raised on wood pilings like short legs, and looked as if they had just walked to town. Jack shouldered the shovel, and Praiseworthy shouldered the pick. On the roof of the stage, the driver was throwing down trunks and hand luggage. "What's the best hotel in town?" asked Praiseworthy. "The Empire," asked the driver. "What's the worst?" squinted Cut-Eye Higgins. "The Empire." Praiseworthy glanced at Jack. "Unless I miss my guess, there's only one hotel in town. The Empire." It was exactly 1 hour and 5 minutes before Jack saw the diggings. First, Praiseworthy registered at the hotel. They washed. Immediately, Praiseworthy wrote a letter to Dr. Buckbee advising him that Cut-Eye Higgins was in Hangtown, but that the map had fallen into the hands of a gang of highwaymen. "Can we go now?" said Jack, fidgeting. He had polished his horn spoon, and was so much he could see his nose in it. Go where? The diggings. Oh, the diggings will still be there after lunch, Master Jack. Praiseworthy's patience was marveled, and in exasperation. They had come more than 15,000 miles, and now they had to stop to eat? Jack didn't care if they passed up eating for a week, a month even. He wondered if he could ever grow up to be as easygoing as Praiseworthy. But once they sat down in the hotel restaurant, Jack discovered he was so hungry that he ordered bear steak. The only other items on the menu was sawbelly and beans, and Jack figured you had to be starving to order that. You and the boy want bread with your grub? Asked the waiter. He was a big fellow in floppy boots. Why not? Answered Praiseworthy. It's $1 a slice. The butler slowly arched an eyebrow. $2 with butter on it. Praiseworthy peered at Jack and then smiled. Hang the cost, sir. We're celebrating our arrival. Bread and butter, if you please. The bear steak was greasy and stringy, but something to write home about. Jack forced it down. After they left the restaurant, Praiseworthy bought a pair of buckskin pouches at the general merchandise store and emptied the gold dust out of his glove. The index finger was springing a leak. Jack liked the new leather smell of the pouch. He tucked it under his belt next to his horn spoon, and he was beginning to feel like a miner. Then, with 10 wash bins under their arms and the pick and shovel across their shoulders, they set out for the diggings. The day was hot and sweaty. When they reached running water, they saw miners crouched everywhere along the banks. They were washing gold out of the dirt and everything from wooden bowls to frying pans. Anybody digging here? Asked Praiseworthy when they came to a bare spot. Sure is, came the answer. That's Buffalo John's spot. The butler and the boy moved on upstream. Here and there, miners were shoveling dirt into long wooden troughs set in running water to catch the flakes of gold. Anybody digging here? Asked Praiseworthy. Yup, came the answer. That's Jimmy from town's claim. On and on they went, looking for a place to dig. They passed miners in blue shirts and red shirts and check shirts and some in no shirts at all. Picks assaulted the earth and shovels flew. Weathered tents were staked to the hills, and the smell of boiling coffee drifted through the air. After they had walked a mile and a half, Jack began to think they would never find a patch of ground that wasn't spoken for. Suddenly, a pistol shot cracked the mountain air. Praiseworthy's wash basin rang like a bell and leaped from his arm and went clattering away. You there! A voice from behind bellowed. Praiseworthy turned. His eyes narrowed slowly. Are you talking to me, sir? Talking and shooting. What you doing with my washpan under your arm? Jack stared at the man. He had a thick, tangled beard, and his ears were bent over under the weight of his slouch hat. Needless to say, you're mistaken, Praiseworthy answered. Until this moment, I've had the good fortune never to set eyes on you or your washpan, sir. We don't take kindly to thievery in these parts, growled the miner, stepping forward. A man steals around here, we lop off his ears. That's miner's law. Do you have any laws against shooting at strangers? Nope. Jack couldn't imagine Praiseworthy with his ears lopped off. He took a grip on the handle of the shovel as the miner came closer. His heart beat a little faster, and he waited for a signal from Praiseworthy. The miner belted his pistol and picked up the washpan. He crimped an eye and looked it over. It's mine, all right. You're either nearsighted or a scoundrel, said Praiseworthy. Jack was ready to fight, if not for their lives, at least for Praiseworthy's ears. Just then a flash of tin in the sunlight from a pile of wet rocks caught Jack's eye. He dropped the shovel and went for it. Is this your pan? Jack said. The miner's bushy eyebrows shot up like birds taking wing. It is at that, ain't it? Then he laughed at it, as if it were a joke on him. I'd forgot my boots if I didn't have 'em on. Praiseworthy peered at the man. Apparently shooting at strangers by mistake didn't amount to anything in the diggings. The miner hardly gave it another thought. How about a cup of Jamocha? Jamocha? Said Praiseworthy. Coffee. I got a pot working on the fire. Where are you strangers from? Pitchpine Billy Pierce, they call me, and I'd be rightly pleased if you did the same. Shucks, looks like I wore a hole plumb through your washpan. Good shooting, though, weren't it? Praiseworthy put his finger through the hole. The washpan was useless. Perfect shooting, sir. No hard feelings, said Pitchpine Billy. I can show you more ways to wash gold than skin a cat. Let's get that coffee. Put hair on your boy's chest. He your son? Jack looked up at Praiseworthy. My son? The butler started to explain, but the miner didn't leave a long enough pause. Mississippi Macfin has his 2 boys with him. I hear they just stuck it rich over at Poverty Hill. And then there's the Peterman boy. He and his pa is trying their luck at Swellhead Diggins. What's your name, boy? Jack. You look powerful clean for a young'un. It don't seem natural somehow. Why, your ears shine like new minted gold pieces. Jack felt his face redden, and he glanced at Praiseworthy. I'm not going to wash for a week, he thought, or a month, or maybe even until we get back to Boston. There was an air of hospitality about the miner that pleased Praiseworthy, and he forgave him for the hole in his gold pan. Sir, a cup of coffee would taste fine. Pitchpine Billy led them to his weathered canvas tent pitched along the slope. The coffee pot was boiling merrily. He filled 3 tin cans. Black as paint. It looked to Jack. He had never tasted coffee in his life. Aunt Arabella would be furious. He looked at Praiseworthy, and Praiseworthy gave him a nod, as if to make up for having Jack wash his ears back at the hotel. The tin cans were so hot they felt as if they had just been forged. Jack sat on a rock to let the brew cool. Although Praiseworthy's coat and boiler hat had fallen by the wayside, he clung to the black umbrella as a last badge of his calling. A butler, mused Pitchpine Billy. He drank his coffee down, steam and all. You any relative to Hemp Butler over in Muletown? The name is Praiseworthy, not Butler, sir. The miner crimped an eye. You don't say. Well, he calls himself Butler, old Hemp does. Never knowed his name was Praiseworthy, but I always figured him for the shifty type. How about 10-Spot Butler over in Poker Flat? He your folks? There seemed no point in trying to make himself clear, and Praiseworthy let it go. Tell me, Mr. Pierce. Just call me Pitchpine Billy. How do we stake a claim? Easy. Find yourself a piece of real estate nobody's working, pound 4 pegs in the corners. Put tin cans on 'em folks can see, rags and all. They'll do, and you got yourself a legal claim. That's miner's law. As long as you work it at least 1 day a month, it stays yours. He laughed and stroked his beard. Of course, the other 30 days you got to stand around shooting off squatters and claim jumpers. He refilled his tin can. Why, there are places along the river where the claims is only 4 foot square, and the boys is digging out a fortune back to back. Jack finally picked up his tin can. The steam alone was like a dragon's breath. Now he was almost sorry Praiseworthy had given him a nod. At the first taste, the coffee bit his tongue. Drink up, Jack, Jamocha Jack. That's what we'll call you. A man ain't really accepted around here until he's won himself a nickname. Best coffee I ever tasted, Jack said hoarsely. Plenty more in the pot. I ground in a few acorns for flavor. Jack winced inwardly. Jamocha Jack, the name pleased him, but he wasn't sure he could win it. The coffee stung and burned and tasted poisonous. He forced down another mouthful. He was afraid the miner would take back the name if he didn't drain the can. He tried another swig, but it wouldn't go down. Praiseworthy, catching Jack's distress out of the corner of his eye, shifted his position. The tip of his umbrella jiggled Jack's elbow and the tin can jumped. The coffee spilled. It's no account, said Pitchpine Billy. He lifted the pot and refilled Jack's can. We don't stand on table manners out here. Jack gulped and stared at the fresh, steaming black potion of coffee. He had to begin all over again. Praiseworthy gave him a compassionate glance. He considered it his duty to look out for Jack, but now he had only made matters worse. Let me show you how to wash out gold without water, Pitchpine Billy was saying. Take your horn spoon, boy, and scrape me some dirt from the crack in that rock. It's places like that the Spangles like to hide, if there is any. Jack was glad to set the coffee aside to cool. He slipped the horn spoon from his belt and turned eagerly to the crack in the rocks. Just a handful, boy. Jack scraped away, gathering up river sand and bits of dead pine needles. The horn spoon worked fine. It got in the cracks. He filled the miner's outstretched hand and sat on his heels to watch. "This is a trick the Sonorians use," said Pitch Pine Billy. "They come from Sonora down Mexico way. Water must be scarcer than gold around there. We call this dry washing." He poured the dirt in a small stream from fist to hand like sand, and in an hourglass while at the same time blowing on it. Sand and pine needles scattered under the force of his breath. He poured again, and each time the handful of dirt grew smaller. Excuse me. Grain from grain, gold is 8 times heavier than sand. If you blow just right, the spangles fall and the lighter stuff goes flying. Jack bent closer. Finally, Pitch Pine Billy had nothing left to blow. He held out the rough palm of his hand and laughed. "Boy, you struck it rich already. Look there." Resting in his hand were 2 gleaming pinheads of gold, but to Jack they looked as large as jewels. "Put 'em in your pouch, boy," said Pitch Pine Billy. "Easy. Don't knock over your coffee." "Thank you, sir," Jack smiled, whipping out his brand new buckskin pouch. "But they're yours." The miner grinned. "Anything that small, I throw back in. You and your paw can squat on my claim. But Praiseworthy's not. There's more yeller underfoot than I can dig out. I'd be obliged if you'd clear some of it out of the way. You got any idea how to work that tin pan of yours, boy?" "Mr. Quartz Jackson." "You a friend of old Quartz? Why didn't you say so? Stay for dinner. Here, we'll have sawbelly and beans. I won't take no for an answer here. Now let's get our boots wet, and I'll learn you how to pan. Bring your coffee." Jack exchanged a glance with Praiseworthy. "Sawbelly and beans. We'd be delighted to join you for dinner," Praiseworthy said, since Pitch Pine Billy had left them no choice. They moved to the edge of the stream, and Jack took a swallow of coffee. The miner pulled a few weeds and threw them in the pan. Jack got down another mouthful of coffee. "Around running water," explained Pitch Pine Billy. "Gold has a way of getting tangled in the roots of weeds and grass." He dipped water in the pan and washed the roots clean. He added more dirt until the wash basin was better than half full. Then he began to pan using the same circular motion Quartz Jackson had shown them. You get rid of the rocks and slickens, little by little." "Slickens?" said Jack. "Mud with the gold worked out of it. Keep the pan working and dripping and working until the spangles reach bottom. Fish out the rocks. See how I'm letting the slicker spill over the edge of the pan? It takes practice, boy. At first, you'll lose more color over the side than you'll save in the bottom, but you'll get the hang of it. Ain't you drinking your coffee, boy? Why, look there. We struck it rich again. Let me have your pouch." Jack took 2 hard swallows of coffee. Then he pulled off his shoes, rolled up his trousers, and tried his hand with the gold pan. The mountain water was icy, but he hardly noticed it at first. He hunted grass and weeds. 5 minutes later, he could no longer feel his feet. "You're standing in melted snow off the high peaks," Pitch Pine Billy chuckled. "Wash out enough color and you can buy yourself some boots." Then he turned to Praiseworthy. "You ain't exactly dressed for prospecting yourself. You and your boy will be needing a tent and a mountain canary." Mountain canary?" Praiseworthy asked. "Mule or burro. There goes one hee-hawing now. Got a fine singing voice, don't he? What's that umbrella for?" "A matter of habit. Well, it ain't going to rain around here for some time, but seeing as how I punctured your gold pan, I don't see any reason why an umbrella won't work just as well. Let me show you." But Pitch Pine Billy lifted it off Praiseworthy's arm and opened the umbrella wide. He stuck it in the ground upside down. "If you don't mind, sir," said Praiseworthy with a flash of impatience, "I happen to treasure that." "Yes, sir," the miner was saying to himself. "It ought to work fine, just fine." Then he began shoveling dirt into the open umbrella. Praiseworthy watched with a kind of quiet horror. He'd carried that black umbrella for years, and now it was being ruined before his eyes. "Oh, thank you, sir." But by then Pitch Pine Billy had lifted the dirt-filled umbrella into the water and was dunking it. He began to swirl it by the handle. He dunked and twirled and twirled and dunked. "Why, I've panned gold in a pocket handkerchief," the miner said. "The dirt dissolves and washes through the leaves and leaves the spangles behind." Jack, meanwhile, was working the slickens out of his pan. He'd step out of the water to warm his feet and take a sip of coffee, and then return. He worked 2 pans of dirt without finding a speck of color, but then he didn't have the hang of it. He was losing the gold with the slickens, but he stayed with it and his feet turned blue. Finally, Pitchpine Billy was no longer plunging the umbrella, but working with a deft, gentle washing movement. He fingered out the rocks and after another moment returned the umbrella to Praiseworthy. "Best gold pan along the river," he grinned. "I might buy me one of those myself." The mud was gone. In its place, along the black fabric of the umbrella, lay a bright dusting of gold and spangles. Praiseworthy crimped an eye and smiled at the hospitable miner. "I think I can get the hang of it, sir." He removed his shoes, rolled up his trousers, and set to work. All through the afternoon, Jack could be seen panning and taking a sip of cold coffee, and Praiseworthy cut an elegant figure plunging a muddy umbrella in the stream. Finally, Jack reached to the bottom of the tin can, and that was that. "Yes, sir, first-rate coffee, Pitchpine Billy," he said. "First rate." "Glad you liked it," answered the miner with a bushy-faced grin. Jamocha Jack. So we're going to come back on Monday. So you guys need to subscribe to the channel so that you know when I post new readings. So we're going to do chapter 12 on Monday, and it's Bullwhip. So I wonder who that is. I don't remember that name on the ship. So think about that, who you think Bullwhip might be. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed chapter 10 and 11. See you guys on Monday. Have a good weekend. And you guys send me emails. I'd love to hear from you. All right. Love you guys. Bye.